So welcome to another in the Dolby Institute and SoundWorks podcast series. We're having conversations with sound artists, and I'm super thrilled today. We're here at the Technicolor Paramount facility on the historic Paramount Pictures lot in Hollywood. And we're talking with Anna Behlmer today, who is a re-recording mixer and kind of I'm not going to say a legend in our business, because that implies that you've been around for forever and a day. But you do have 10 Oscar nominations to your credit, and you were the first woman to be nominated for an Oscar for Best Sound.
Yes, I was, and the legend thing does bother me a little bit because it does make me sound old. So let's skip that.
Absolutely, but. I just do want to embarrass you a little bit by saying, like, this list of movies that you've worked on is just amazing. From J.J. Abrams' Star Trek through War of the Worlds, Thin Red Line, which is a movie that I absolutely loved.
Me too.
And Evita, what an amazing, what an amazing experience that must have been for you. And some of my, L.A. Confidential and Moulin Rouge. Amazing sound work in those films.
I've been really fortunate. I've worked on some really great films with some really fantastic filmmakers. It's been great.
And recently, 50 Shades of Grey, which is, of course, everyone's favorite soft erotic film, right?
Yeah, that's exactly what that is. Everyone's favorite.
So, we were talking a little bit before we rolled about, like, who's going to be listening to this podcast. And I think there's going to be some industry people, but I'm sure we'll have some sound nerds as well. But for the uninitiated, why don't you just explain to us what a re-recording mixer does and what you do on the film?
Very basically, what a re-recording mixer does is put the dialogue, the music, and the sound effects together after all of that material has been edited by sound editors, and so that comes to us, and we work in an environment that looks like a movie theater with a very large screen, and we have a very large mixing console, and we take the elements of the dialogue, the music, and the sound effects, and we balance them against each other. Using equalization, adding reverb. We put it in the room spatially using panning, and create the soundtrack. To enhance the experience of going to the movies. And and we do that in several formats. Whether it is 5/1 is, I believe, still the most common. Which is left, center, right, left surround, right surround, with an LFE, which is a low-end boom channel, that's what 5.1 indicates. Mm-hmm. And then there are several other formats now, 7/1, Atmos, Oro, and they're all just bigger, better formats.
More immersive.
More immersive formats, exactly.
Well, I'm curious, what was did you dream of being a re-recording mixer when you were a little girl?
No, of course not.
So how did you get into this crazy business, and how did you find yourself being here?
It's always about a boy. I was dating I was dating a guy who was a sound engineer at a very small facility in Hollywood called Ryder Sound, and
I remember Ryder Sound.
Back in the day.
Yeah.
And I was going to college and changing majors every semester. What am I going to be? I think the last thing I thought I was going to be was a lawyer. So I was thinking about taking the LSAT and.
I did that too. Are you a native Angelino?
I am.
Oh, okay. There's so few of you guys, natives here. Everybody seems to have landed here from someplace else.
I grew up here, and a lot of my friends grew up here, so I know a lot of native Angelinos. Yeah. So when I was going to school, I was dating this sound engineer, and the only time I could see him was if I went to the studio and hung out. So I did. And since I was there, I might as well help. So in those days, we used to have to thread reproducers, and it was 35 millimeter film. So I would, learned how to hang them on the dummies and thread them up. And so anyway, I was there a lot.
So you were back in the machine room.
Hanging dubbers, right? Yes,
Yeah.
back in the machine room, hanging dubbers. And one day this mixer walks out. His name is Gary Bourgeois. He walked out and he said, you spend so much time here, you should get yourself a union card. And literally I thought, wow, that's a good idea. I need a job. I should get myself a union card. And then they said to me, well, go over to Glen. They actually hire women over there. I think there's 2.
They actually hire women. That's what they said to you. That's amazing.
It is amazing because there were none.
Yeah.
So it was, I'm not going to tell you what year. Because there's that dating thing.
It wasn't that long ago.
It was a while ago. It was 80s.
Yeah. So, and that was kind of a go-go era in Los Angeles sound, wasn't it? I mean, in terms of I mean, there were big movies, you know, Beverly Hills Cop and those kind of movies were getting done. And
absolutely.
But I think I'm curious to hear you talk about that because I think it's still the case that post-production sound is a very male-dominated, you know, business.
It's much better now, but then it was ridiculous.
Were you the only re-recording mixer at that really in the end?
Well, you know what? For feature films, in 1989, yes.
Yeah.
I was. I mean, there was one other who was in television, and then there was one other who was an ADR mixer.
Wow.
Yeah.
Not a lot of support for you guys, was there?
No, not at all. Not at all. So I went over to Glen because they hired women over there. And there was a woman who was in charge of scheduling and hiring. And I walked into her office and I said, you know, hi, I'm really interested. Can you help me? And she said, yeah, okay. I don't know why. Mm-hmm. You know? And I've seen her since.
What was the first movie?
When I first mixing?
Yeah.
Remember. Kindergarten Cop.
Really?
Yeah.
Ivan Reitman.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ivan Reitman. And I have just recently done a film with Ivan Reitman called Draft Day.
Uh-huh.
All these years later.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's great.
That's great. That's one of the things I love about this business is, you know, when people do form loyalties and relationships and you get to, you know, grow your career with somebody else. And that's really amazingly satisfying.
Yeah, he's great. I worked with him and Shelley Kahn, his editor, who he still is his editor, and they kind of, you know, it was one of those, well, we discovered you.
Right.
This is great.
Have you so you mix sound effects.
Mm-hmm.
Has it been that way since the beginning? Was that where you initially focused in on?
Yes, I've always mixed sound effects. I like mixing sound effects. I mean, now that I'm here, I do a little more of different things, but I primarily enjoy mixing sound effects.
So and for those who don't know, in a typical 2-mixer setup, you got one mixer who's mixing dialogue and music, and then another mixer who's mixing the sound effects. And so the dialogue and music side wasn't that appealing to you?
No, not really. I mean, you know what? Now that I've kind of messed around with all of it, I like mixing music because it's fun, and sound effects are fun. I'm not really drawn to mixing dialogue. It's incredibly tedious.
It's very tedious.
It's very tedious.
If you've ever sat on a mixing stage during a dialogue pre-dub, you know how tedious that is.
It is tedious.
Yeah.
And my hat's off to those people who do it so well.
Yeah.
But it's tough. And it's not that fun.
Fair enough. So, I mean, obviously the technology has changed quite a bit over the course of time that you've been, because you obviously saw the digital revolution come by. But I'm curious to hear from your perspective, from an artistic, creative standpoint, has the technology changed what you do and the approach that you take to mixing?
It doesn't really. I mean, you know, the source material is better. The way things are recorded and laid out, and the accuracy in which we can do things is so much improved. But I think that the great part is that all of that is kind of behind the scenes, at least as far the way I work, and it's still completely a feel, kind of emotional, artistic thing, mixing. You know, I was always taught. I worked with Richard Portman early in my career, who was just a legend.
Now,
And
that we can use legend when
yes,
we talk about
Richard Portman was a legend, and he always would say to me, "Just watch the picture; it tells you what it needs.
Interesting.
Just watch the picture. It's like a photograph, you know. Build it, you know. Put the backgrounds in, and then put the main effects in, and then just keep layering it like you would with in photography."
Right.
And so I've always watched the picture, So for me, looking at a screen, a Pro Tools screen, isn't natural.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not natural, but I do it, but it's fine. It's not distracting. It's fine. I pretty much do. It's not that different. It really isn't.
Well, I want to talk with you a little bit about, Pro Tools and how that's changed, what you do as a mixer. But I also am just kind of curious because I started my career, as a post-production kind of executive before I went up to Skywalker. And I was sort of at that transition point between analog and digital. And the thing that I saw happening, really, because that limitation on the headroom, mm-hmm. largely disappeared with the transition to digital.
Yes.
And movies got a lot louder.
Mm-hmm.
Often, I think, to the disservice of the film, because sometimes, by the time the director and the editor get to you on the mixing stage, they've been living with the thing for so long,
right?
That sometimes they just want to amp it up just to get their juices flowing again around it.
We were kids in a candy shop.
Right.
We had a new toy.
Right.
And it's true, for a while there, tracks were really crazy loud. But we all figured it out.
It settled back down.
We settled back down, don't you think?
I think largely, it's interesting. We were talking before we rolled about quiet mixes and the role of silence in film. And I think people are coming back to that again in a way.
I think it's apparent. I think it's very apparent in the way, just when you look at the things that were nominated for sound. I mean, these days, as opposed to 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. It used to just always be the biggest blockbuster, the loudest blockbuster, the ones with the most sound in them.
Right.
I mean,
sound by the pound.
Yeah, pretty much. And it's not like that anymore.
Yeah.
It's more about delicacy and taste and things that are different. I mean, I really love going to the movies and hearing something I've never heard. Mm-hmm. The creativity that it takes to create that stuff. It's so different.
Yeah. This is always a tricky question, but I'm curious. Whose work do you particularly admire, other mixers in our industry?
Gary Rydstrom.
Yeah.
It's probably a hands down. Everybody says the same thing.
He's just doing. Yeah. What do you respond to in Gary's work?
Gary's work has such clarity.
Mm-hmm.
I can. It's so his work helps focus the storytelling always. Mm. And it's never, there's never too much and there's never too little, Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's always just right. And I admire him a lot. I think he's very, very talented. I'm trying to think who else. You know who else is a really fine mixer? Mike Minkler.
He is.
He is.
Yeah.
He is. So, I mean, I remember hearing Born on the 4th of July and just being completely blown away.
Right.
And The Doors, again, completely blown away.
I think I had that experience with probably Mike's track on Chicago. Just the clarity, and it's exactly what you said, which is clarity and detail.
Yeah.
I don't know how he does it. I don't know what sort of magic pixie dust he spreads over that dialogue track, but it just...
Yeah, I know.
It sparkles.
Yeah. It's true.
So what's this picture you're working on now?
I'm working on a film for Paramount called Daddy's Home. It's a comedy with Will Ferrell and Mark Wahlberg, mm-hmm. who's in everything.
He is. He's having a busy time right now, isn't he?
He's busy.
Well, when I was looking at your credit list, I noticed, you have a wide variety of pictures, genres that you've worked on. You've worked on a lot of big action pictures, obviously, but there's a lot of comedy on your reel as well. Three Stooges, of course,
Yeah,
we
right.
must mention. Anchorman 2,
Right.
and this picture for you on the sound effects side of the board. Is there a different approach to comedy as opposed to? I mean, obviously, there's probably fewer sound effects than there are in a big action film, but
It is, and you really have to stay very closely to what the picture editor and the director have been living with. It's not. You can't really go too far with a comedy. It's a little bit frustrating. You know, you don't really have a lot of freedom to do as much as you'd like because you don't want to make it not funny.
right.
I did a film years ago with a director, and he literally said, "You killed the comedy. You changed the sound effect. You killed the comedy."
Really?
Yeah.
Was he right?
No. No. Of course he wasn't right.
But he was used to it a certain way.
Right.
Right.
And then, and then they'll go out and test, and if it doesn't get the same numbers or as many laughs, then, oh, well, we changed that. Shouldn't change anything. And there's that concept.
I had never thought about that. I wonder if comedy directors and editors, if they're more just inherently superstitious because it's so ephemeral comedy. You never know exactly how it's going to play.
If there's a body fall in a comedy, and it gets a laugh, and let's say you changed it, made it bigger,
you can't touch it,
and it doesn't get as good of a laugh, it's your fault.
That is too funny.
Yeah, it's great.
How do you? Well, I'm curious about that. I think temp love is a real issue in our business when temporary sound effects and music get laid in by the picture editorial team, and and then you come along and do but it's not what they're used to hearing, and sometimes they have a
right.
How do you? That's obviously a very fine needle to thread. How do you deal with that situation?
It is a very fine needle to thread. That's why if you're doing an action film, it's easier because obviously they don't have all the, especially with something with VFX. So
they don't have the elements, right?
They don't have the elements. They don't have a fleshed out track. So they're so much more accepting. And then you can make a good, big, fun track that wasn't just exactly what they had. So yeah, it's a little bit frustrating. So you just, you do the best you can. You try and augment in areas that aren't affecting the comedy. But the comedy sounds must always remain the same.
If it gets a laugh once.
Yes, that's it.
Never gets touched again.
Yeah, you never. Yeah. I've also got a lot of animation on my resume as well. Mm-hmm. Tons of animation.
Yeah.
Probably 16 films or something.
And how is that different for you?
That's fun. That's really fun because it's everything's
you're building
creative. Everything's creative, yeah.
Right.
Everything is created from scratch. There's no terrible production track to deal with. It's easy to keep. When a production track is bad, as I know you both, it narrows everything up. It sucks everything into the center.
Yeah.
So when you have a nice clean track, your image is nice and wide, and you can hear all the panning, and you don't have any noise to deal with. It's very satisfying,
But it's also, I mean, from a mixing perspective, animation is a lot more work for you because, it's when you're recording production in a live action environment, all the sounds sit very naturally in that environment because they were recorded there to begin with. So it's really almost like, you're getting a lot of very clean, dry Foley coming in, right? So you have to make those sounds sit in that wherever that environment is.
Yeah, that takes the longest is to pre-dub the Foley, in that process. And but it's fun. I mean, that's what we do.
That's why we get paid the big bucks, right?
Yeah, and it's a challenge, and Foley is everything in animation because then if it's not right, you have talking heads, and then if you're not believing the characters, then you're losing the audience, and everyone has to be sucked in, and it has to be completely believable, and you have to believe that these characters are in the situation doing these things, and so sound is very important. So I enjoy animation. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah. What's At this point, what are the challenges for you? When you come in and you approach a new picture, what's your method of attack with a new movie when it comes in?
You know what? Everything is always a challenge. You're learning every show, and you're meeting new people, you're meeting new filmmakers, and and the challenge really is to, especially with new filmmakers, is to gain their trust, let them know that you're there to do your best for them, and to do that. I mean, when you stop learning, then you gotta get out, and to be open to new people that you work with. I mean, I have been doing this a long time, and everybody is younger and younger, and that's fine, because you know what? They've got great ideas, and you learn from them. They learn from you, and that's really the key. It is a still very collaborative, and that's what makes it at its best. We used to say that mixing movies is a team sport. Everybody's got to be on the same team, going for the same goal, to make the best movie that you can make. I mean, we're on, we're at the end, but we're still a part of this filmmaking process. We're still a part of making this movie, not just making this soundtrack.
Yeah. Do you find that younger filmmakers are more collaborative and open, or is that not even is that a valid generalization?
I don't know if they're collaborative and open. They certainly are more knowledgeable in every aspect, which is really interesting. I mean, I'll have young filmmakers like open their laptops and start putting VFX in. Right. I don't remember, some of the filmmakers I worked with, when I first started doing that.
Well,
or anything like that. It was a whole
separate craft that had its own.
Yeah,
sure.
exactly.
Yeah.
And it wasn't on your laptop.
Right.
So.
Do they do that with sound?
Some do.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm curious about, because certainly one of the trends that I've seen more and more, especially with Pro Tools becoming a ubiquitous tool, is that a lot of the functions that traditionally would have been mixing functions when I started my career are kind of slowly migrating into editorial. And I'm curious to see, to hear you talk about how you work with sound editors, how you strike that balance of, because obviously this is the most expensive part of the process, being in a room like this, paying hundreds or thousands of dollars an hour.
Right.
And there's a lot of pressure to, tighten those budgets and bring that down. So what's the relationship that you have with sound editors, and how do you strike a balance between what you do and what they do?
Well, I guess it's been the last maybe 10 years that they bring tracks kind of pre-mixed for you, and then you get things in 5.1 form. It used to be they just brought tracks, and it was just lots and lots of tracks and sheets and sheets of cue sheets. Yeah. I mean, it was like wallpaper.
Right.
I would have to lay them out on the floor of the theater, and
and you'd have to audition a bunch of stuff, right?
Yeah, and I'd use colored pens to organize, like I should put this here and this here and that.
Wow.
It was just, that's why colored Sharpies are always on a dubbing stage. That's where it started.
Is that true?
Yes.
Huh.
It is true.
Because you needed to mark up the cue sheets.
Yes. Yeah, to separate things out. I mean, it's definitely, it takes up, they do a lot of work before they get to us. So we still have the option to change things because they're in a smaller environment.
Sure.
So sometimes the panning doesn't work.
Doesn't translate.
Yeah, the reverbs don't work. We have the option to change and do any of that. My relationships are usually pretty good and collaborative. I mean, I'll make suggestions. Could we add this? Could we add that? Do you think, or I'll say maybe, is this not working? What do you think? It's always about how you say something in our business. You don't go, no, I hate this. You say, what do you think if I didn't play this and I favored this? Everybody's...
That's not as threatening as, what is this piece of crap sound effect?
Exactly. Well, everybody's invested, and you don't want to alienate anybody or yourself, like I said, it's a team sport.
Yeah.
You know, we all want to have a good time. It's the good time part, that's really important. You know, I mean, we spend hours in these rooms together, and if we have a good rapport and things are going smoothly, the product is better. That whole being angst and, you know, working round the clock with some crazy director who's making huge demands, and if everyone thinks that's a good way to do it and you get better product, I don't think so.
Yeah.
I don't think so.
Yeah. But it's, you know, it is always interesting to me how stressful the mixing stage can be.
It can.
I think, you know, for a lot of directors and for a lot of filmmakers in general, I think that there's a little bit of a reality check that happens on the mixing stage, because there's usually as you're going through, there's one more phase of the process where things can get fixed.
Yes, absolutely.
But this is pretty much the last stop. You know, this is what the film is going to be when it goes out. And so I've just always thought that maybe there's just a moment of kind of panic that sets in when they realize, like, oh, we're done now.
Well, there's that, and then there's worst case scenario, when they come to a realization that maybe it's not really working as well as they thought it was working, and then nothing's right. Yeah, and that is
when that kind of tailspin panic sets in. That's
awful, because and then we here are struggling, and then we hear through the grapevine, oh yeah, the DI is not going well either, or oh yeah, the scoring is not going well either, and then you realize that it's not any of those things. It's the insecurity of the filmmaker about the film.
Right.
And then everybody suffers.
Well, to your point, you know, the tremendously successful mixers that I've had the pleasure of working with in my career, I think that their success has been about taste and about creativity and about, you know, the ability to execute, but it's been at least as much about their ability to manage the stage.
Absolutely.
And control the flow and work with the director.
Yes. And get the director's trust.
Yeah.
When they walk in and they feel calm and as though everything is well taken care of, then you're gold.
Was that something that came naturally to you, or how did you learn that over time and on the job?
I watched The Master. I worked with Andy Nelson.
Andy works his stage very well, doesn't he?
He does.
Yeah, he's a master at that.
He is, and some of it has rubbed off, luckily. Yeah. So there you go. So Andy, if you're ever listening to this, I'm giving you a whole big old shout out.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, and it's so, because I've also been on mixing stages with younger mixers, and you can tell, like, when that panic starts to set in and people, you can feel when it's starting to spin out of control. Yeah,
it's it can be ugly, yeah. But yes, having that voice of reason and that voice of authority that seems to calm the filmmakers down.
Just calm them down.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. It's such a huge part of the job.
It is. It is a huge part of the job, and then of course dealing with the studio as well. You know.
I'm curious about that. How much? I mean, other than, you know, suits who come in and sit on the back couch and listen to the mix. I mean, how involved? I mean, we're obviously working in a mixing studio on a studio lot. So, do people tend to come and hang out on the mixing stage a lot and offer notes and that sort of thing?
Well, there's always the big playback.
Right.
You know, the final playback with lots of suits, and everyone has input. Yeah.
I guess it also depends on the director, doesn't it?
It does. Very, very true. There you go. Sometimes, you know, depends on the director. If it's a big enough director.
There are not a lot of people giving notes on a Steven Spielberg mix.
No, I would say none.
Just the one that matters.
Yes, absolutely. And that's the easiest scenario for us. It's like one master is a good thing. I love a powerful director.
Right.
You know.
A powerful, decisive director.
Absolutely. There you go.
I wanted to talk with you a little bit about kind of technological changes in 5.1, 7.1, and now the object-based. So you've had the opportunity to work in Dolby Atmos.
I have. I've done 3 things.
And just from a kind of a production workflow standpoint, were those Were those native Atmos mixes, or were they 5.1, 7.1 mixes that you guys then went in and redid in Atmos?
I've done both.
And I guess I should start by asking, what's your experience been with Atmos, and when do you think it's a good tool?
My first experience with Atmos was on the Ninja Turtles last summer, and I did it natively. And on a film like that, it was really fun because they're always on rooftops. And you hear their voices from the street, or you hear their movements from the street, so you could place them over your heads. Yeah, the height really helped us a lot.
Yeah.
And they are just flying around the room, So, the height and then across the ceiling was a great tool. So it was a lot of fun, and we did it natively. And then the fold downs, it worked very well. I was very happy with the way it went to 7.1 and to 5.1. So it was a positive experience.
Did you get involved in home theater mixes?
I did that one on Turtles, and I was so pleasantly surprised. It really sounded great.
Yeah.
And I had no idea, because you do it in here, and then it goes away.
And you don't know what kind of
yeah, exactly. I don't know. It's like, what?
Yeah.
So it goes away, and then I got a call from the person who does that for Paramount, and asked me to come over and listen to the DVD.
Which was a nice thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And see if I would approve it, which
Right.
was lovely. And I sat down and I thought, this is really great. I was so happy with it.
And had they done anything to it, or was it pretty much they set the faders at 0 and...
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah.
I guess so. It's funny. I went and heard it once in another room, and I wasn't happy at all. And then I was told that room wasn't set up correctly.
Right. It's always the calibration. Right?
Yeah, it's always a calibration. So then I was kind of like, "Whoa, am I going to get to hear this again?"
Yeah.
So anyway, I did, and it was good. It was a very positive.
Well, I'm always curious
experience.
about that, because there's certainly, there are mixers I've worked with who, have felt like, near field is a different monitoring environment. I want to cut, I want to optimize my mix for that, and they'll get in there and really kind of agonize and fine tune and tweak. And then I've also worked with mixers who are like, I did my mix. It sounds great. Set the faders at 0. It will translate anywhere it needs to go.
Well, I did the near field. I'm trying to remember if I did it in this big room or in a smaller room. I think I did it here, but with, the monitors all around me, the smaller monitors.
Yeah.
And
it's a little weird experience when you're sitting in a huge room like this. You have a little monitor with some little speakers sitting around.
Yeah, it is kind of different. But, yeah, I did it here. And we did a few things, I had to work it a little bit, but it really turned out well. I was really happy with it, the way it all worked.
One of the things that's always been interesting to me, kind of about, I guess I would call it the LA way of working, or traditionally was, you had mixer teams that stayed together for a long time. But that seems to be changing.
Yeah, it's kind of a drag. I liked it.
Well, I wanted to ask your opinion on that. What do you...
You know what? It's such a good thing to be sitting next to someone and know exactly. You get a shorthand. You don't even speak after a while, You're sitting there, as an effects mixer, I'm sitting there and I'm listening to the dialogue mixer trying to match ADR. So instantly, I'm thinking about, I need some cloth movement. I need to put some footsteps in there. I need to get the Foley to be working. I'm listening. I'm like, okay. I need to dull the Foley up, make it match into the production a little better, and then as he comes into his ADR, it just happens.
Smooth that out.
It
Right.
just happens,
Yeah.
and and okay, here comes the music cue. I hear the music. Okay, there's the music. I'm gonna make room. Hear the entrance. Good. You know what I mean? You just.
Right. You get it.
You get it.
You get into a flow and a
You
rhythm
get into a
first.
flow, absolutely, and
Yeah.
you get it, and yeah, I liked it. I did it for 18 years with the same partner.
Yeah, it was a long marriage.
It was, and but it's fun to work with different people. That's been a little.
You also
bit
get exposed
fun.
to different ideas and approaches. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's good, but yeah, I have a partner now. Terry Porter. We work together as much as we can, but still, it's not like it once was. You're right, it's changing.
Yeah.
You know, there's very few of those teams that stay together and work exclusively together, but there's a couple.
Yeah, it is interesting. What do you? I'm kind of curious. You know, we started talking about, you know, you went from Ryder over to Glen because they were the place who hired women.
Yeah.
And how has that part of the industry changed over the course of your career? Because I think there are more women, but there's still, I mean, we're nowhere near 50%, that's for sure.
No, but I will proudly tell you that there are 3 women mixing in this building today. So
That's big progress.
that's big progress.
Yeah.
That's big progress.
Do they kind of look up to you as a mentor? Have you gotten that experience?
Yes, I have. Yes, I have. And, you know, yeah, and it's kind of weird, but, you know, I'm excited that there's more. I think it's a great thing.
Do you, I'm curious, what are your thoughts about, you know, how as an industry can we address that? How can we change that? How can we bring more women into
it seems like it's happening right now.
You feel
I
like
do.
the
Every time
momentum
I
is
open the
changing?
trades, they're talking about more the success of women directors,
Right.
you know? And if it starts there, when it starts at the top,
Right.
it will organically evolve that way.
Yeah.
And we will eventually be at 50%.
Yeah.
I think editorial is very close. There's
Right.
lots of female.
There's a long
editors.
history of very successful female picture editors.
Yes,
in our
there
business.
is.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So we're getting there. You know, mixing is a hard avenue. It always has been.
Why do you say that?
Well, I think it's almost traditionally that way. And it's, you know, some things are just because they've always been that way,
Sure.
which makes little or no sense.
Right.
But
That's momentum.
yeah, but it's changing. It's changing. And more sound designers are mixers. So, you know, there needs to be more of that, more women doing sound design and moving into mixing that way.
Right. Right. Well, that's how young people become mixers now, is they
Yeah.
tend to come up through sound design.
Yeah.
I really appreciate you taking the time today. It's a pleasure to be here, you know, on the mixing stage with Anna Behlmer. This is Glenn Kiser from the Dolby Institute and the podcast series Conversations with Sound Artists with the SoundWorks collection. Signing off. Thank you, Anna.
You're welcome. Thank you.